Motor sailors don't seem to make much sense at first glance. In fact, most people completely overlook them. But after spending a few years at sea, they suddenly start to make a lot more sense. Let me explain how. I need to be honest here. When you first hear the word motor sailor, you probably think, okay, what exactly is this? Is it a sailboat? Is it a powerboat? Is it neither? Is it both? And that's exactly why most people skip right past them. Sailors say, it's not a real sailboat. Powerboat people say, why is it so slow? And the motor sailor just sits there, never fully understood by either side. But when you talk to experienced offshore sailors, especially the ones who've done long passages, you notice something interesting. Some of them have switched to motor sailors, and they don't regret it. Why? It takes a little time to understand, but once you do, the logic becomes very clear. Let's start with the pure sailboat myth. There's a strange belief in the sailing world. Using the engine somehow feels like cheating. Like the moment you fire it up, you're abandoning real seamanship. Like waiting for wind, drifting along for hours, or not moving at all. That's somehow a virtue. I understand the people who say this. Sailing is an art. Working with the wind is satisfying. Turning off the engine and moving under sail alone. That's a genuinely beautiful feeling. But in real life, especially if you're sailing along the East Coast, the wind doesn't always cooperate. Think about the Chesapeake Bay. Summer afternoons with glassy, flat water. No wind at all. 95 degrees. And the marina you're trying to reach is still 40 miles away. On a pure sailboat, what do? You wait. Or you run the engine, but a small one, on a boat that was never designed with motoring efficiency in mind. On a motor sailor, what do? You keep moving, efficiently. Reason 1. Motor sailors actually get you sailing more. This sounds contradictory, but stay with me. Someone spent years cruising on a pure sailboat, then made the switch to a motor sailor. When you ask why, they say something interesting. On my sailboat, I was running the engine far more often, because when the wind wasn't there, I didn't have time to wait. On my motor sailor, I actually put the sails up more, because knowing I have the engine there gives me that freedom. This is a psychological thing. Knowing you have an alternative sometimes means you never have to use that alternative. On a pure sailboat, when the wind starts to drop, there's pressure. Should I keep going? Should I start the engine? Am I losing time? On a motor sailor, that pressure feels different. If there's wind, you sail. If there's no wind or not enough of it, you motor. Switching between the two doesn't feel like a defeat, and strangely enough, that freedom actually pushes you to sail more. Reason 2. Priorities change as you get older, and it starts earlier than you think. This is a personal topic, but it matters. You're sailing in your 30s. You're physically strong. You recover from fatigue faster. Bad weather feels like an adventure. Spending a night on deck feels like exactly what you signed up for. Then your 40s arrive. You're still strong. But you start to notice, recovering from 3 consecutive night watches isn't as quick as it used to be. Your joints have a bit more to say in the mornings. Bad weather is still manageable, but you've stopped calling it exciting. In your 50s and 60s, that gap becomes much more obvious. Long night watches feel heavier. You're relying on experience and judgment far more than physical strength. And at that point, what a motor sailor offers: stability, reliability, less physical demand, starts to look very different. Someone described it this way. They'd spent more than 20 years on pure sailboats. Then they made the switch to a motor sailor. When asked why, they said something very simple. I stopped using the sea to prove something. I started using it to actually live. This isn't giving something up, this is an evolution. And here's the interesting part. This shift happens much earlier than most people expect. Not at 60, sometimes at 45, sometimes even at 40. Because it's not just about physical strength, it's about your priorities changing. You want to prove less, you want to experience more. And at that point, a motor sailor starts to become a better tool than a pure sailboat. Reason 3. On long passages, reliability comes before everything talk. To someone who's done a solo passage from Annapolis down to the Bahamas, they won't talk to you about the art of sailing. They'll talk about what it felt like crossing the Gulf Stream. The wind shifts, the current shifts, the weather forecast doesn't hold. And in that moment, what you need is reliability. Pure sailboats have engines. Of course they do. But usually small ones, low priority, designed to be used when necessary. A motorsailor's engine comes from a different mindset. It's there to actually be used, reliably. For extended periods, a boat has a mechanical failure on a windy night, offshore. On a pure sailboat, that's a crisis. On a motorsailor, that's a bad day. The difference seems small. But out there, in that moment, it's enormous. The mistake isn't having a mechanical failure. The mistake is heading out believing the engine is just a backup. Reason 4. Fuel efficiency matters a lot more than you think. Powerboats are designed for speed. They burn fuel fast. Sailboats are designed for efficiency, but their real power comes from the wind. Motorsailers sit in an interesting place between the two. At the right speed, usually somewhere around 7 to 8 knots, a good motorsailor can be surprisingly efficient. Think about what that means in practice. You're crossing from Florida to the Bahamas, or cruising down the ICW. You're running the engine an average of 8 hours a day. Fuel costs, range, how often you need to stop and fill up, it all starts to add up. Someone switched from an older trawler to a motorsailor. At the end of the first season, they compared fuel costs. The difference was significant. And it's not just about money. In remote areas, small islands, out-of-the-way anchorages, fuel isn't always easy to find. Burning less means more freedom. Reason 5. Comfort isn't a luxury. It's a safety issue. Motorsailors typically have a deeper, wider hull. At first, this looks like a disadvantage. Less agile, less of that sailboat feel. But think about what you actually want on a long passage. You're not spending hours on the boat. You're spending days, maybe weeks. On a narrow, deep sailboat, when a wave comes through, the boat heels hard. That's exciting. At first. But on the third night, when you're exhausted and the weather's turned, that constant motion wears you down. Things roll around. Cooking gets harder, sleeping gets harder, and fatigue is one of the most dangerous things at sea. A wider platform means a more stable boat. A more stable boat means less fatigue. Less fatigue means better decisions. Someone made a passage to Bermuda and ran into rough conditions. 2 out of 5 crew got seasick. 3 were so exhausted they were nearly non-functional. At that point, a wide, stable platform stops being a luxury. It becomes a necessity. Reason 6. In the used market, motorsailors are deeply undervalued. Now let's look at this from a different angle. Motorsailers, especially well-known brands in good condition, are undervalued in the second-hand market. Why? Because most buyers want either a pure sailboat or a pure powerboat. Motorsailors fall between those two categories and don't get the attention they deserve. What does that mean for you? If you know what you're looking for, you can find a solid motorsailor for significantly less than a comparable pure sailboat or powerboat of the same size and spec. Someone lived this. Spent years searching for a real sailboat. Couldn't find anything in their budget that felt right. Then they started looking at motorsailors. And with the same budget, they found something far better equipped, far better maintained, because the competition was thinner. And over time, as they gained real experience on the water, they began to understand just how much value a motorsailor was actually offering them. Reason 7. For live aboard life, they're nearly ideal. This one gets overlooked a lot, but it's worth talking about. More and more people are living aboard their boats full-time, especially along the southern U.S. coastline, Florida, the Gulf Coast, the Carolinas. The live aboard lifestyle is growing fast. And when you live aboard, your priorities shift completely. You're not someone who goes out on weekends and comes back. You live on the boat, which means the boat isn't just a tool, it's your home. Pure sailboats weren't designed for live-aboard life. They're narrow, storage is limited, sitting at a proper table, cooking in a functional galley. These are luxuries on most sailboats. Powerboats are wider, but when it comes to actually moving somewhere, the fuel costs climb fast. Motorsailors sit in an interesting position in that equation. They typically offer more living space. The forward cabin is more usable, the saloon is more comfortable, the galley is more functional. For daily life, these differences seem small. But when you're living aboard for 6 months, a year, a few years, those small differences add up to something significant. Someone lived aboard a pure sailboat for years, then switched to a motorsailor. What they said was simple. I stopped hitting my head on the ceiling every morning. That sounds ridiculous. But think about hitting your head in the same spot every single morning for a year. Small things accumulate, and eventually they become the most important things. Reason 8. In bad weather scenarios, you have more options. Experienced sailors will tell you, at sea, everything goes off plan eventually. Weather changes, equipment fails. Fatigue builds up and quietly starts affecting your decision-making. And in those moments, the genuinely hard ones, how many options you have matters enormously. On a pure sailboat in deteriorating conditions, your main options are reefing down, trying a different heading, or ducking into a harbor. You have the engine too, but you're working with a limited power source. On a motorsailor, the picture looks different. A stronger engine means you can meet the storm more directly. Positioning yourself relative to the waves is easier. Speed control is far more precise when you need it most. Someone got caught in a serious storm on Long Island Sound. There was a motorsailor and a pure sailboat caught in the same conditions at the same time, both trying to manage. The motorsailor was able to hold 2 extra knots of speed. That sounds like a small margin. But it meant getting into a safe harbor 2 hours earlier. 2 hours. On a stormy night. That's an enormous difference. The mistake isn't getting caught in bad weather. The mistake is not thinking ahead about how many options you'll have when bad weather actually arrives. So, are there no downsides to motorsailers? There are. Let's be honest about this. They don't deliver the windward performance of a pure sailboat. You feel the difference, especially when beating into the wind. Maneuverability is more limited compared to a powerboat. And maintenance, keeping both the sailing systems and the engine systems in good shape, requires more knowledge and more attention. But here's the important question. Are those actually disadvantages for you specifically? For most people, in real-world usage, the answer is no, because most people aren't entering offshore races. Most people aren't measuring wind performance down to the decimal. Most people just want to get from one place to another safely, comfortably, and reliably. And at that, in most conditions, motorsailers do a genuinely good job. So, why does it make more sense over time? This is exactly why motorsailers start to make more sense as time goes on. At first glance, they look like a compromise. Not quite a sailboat, not quite a powerboat. But a few years later, after real experience, the perspective shifts. A motorsailor isn't a compromise. It's a boat that brings together the best of both worlds. When there's wind, you sail. When there's no wind, you keep moving. When conditions deteriorate, the stability protects you. You reach remote places because you're not constantly worrying about fuel. If you live aboard, your home is more comfortable. When bad weather hits, you have more options. And as the years pass, as the experience builds, you start to understand something. The sea tests you, constantly. And what you need to pass that test isn't performance, it's reliability. That's exactly what a motorsailor gives you. And that's it. This isn't a motorsailor advertisement, just an honest assessment. If you have your own experience with motorsailers, thoughts, questions, things you'd push back on, I'd love to see them in the comments. See you in the next one.